Everybody, it's Anthony Brogdon, your main man, the guy that get the people and then ask a few questions, and I let these smooth people tell the stories. These experts come on strong inspirations, and I let them do the talking. And watch out, my guest today, ooh, he gonna put it on you. He gonna, oh man, I'm so excited. He's come on the channel. He and I've talked a few times. Everybody in the town love him because he know what he's talking about, and he gonna share something with you on strong inspirations. Hit the subscribe button. It's free, don't ask no information. Hit the like button on this video. You're gonna like it for sure. Watch. Hit the notifications bell and tell somebody about strong inspirations. We over 280 videos strong. Did you see the one where the guy is his grandfather in Birmingham, Alabama? They firebombed his house while he was on patrol so they wouldn't firebomb his church. Watch that video. Did you see the one with the guy who talks about what slavery was over in Africa? Watch that video. I go across the globe with mine, my friends. Did you see the one where the guy from South Africa who says, hey, I'm colored, that's what they call me. He's lighter complexion, had a few benefits, I guess, more than the darker complected people. But he said, I lived through apartheid, and it was vicious and it was brutal. It was unequitable treatment of Black people. Hey, does that sound like Jim Crow? Same thing. Watch that video. I ain't playing with you. Did you see the one where the great-granddaughters, they found out just by chance that their grandfather owned a car manufacturing company in 1905? Yes, that's right. Black-owned car manufacturing. They started out with the horse and buggy, and then when the cars came on, they said, we can do that too. And made a few cars and was competing against Ford. They just didn't have the money to do the assembly line, and you know how things got diluted, but they kept doing them, and they probably had the company for about 25, 30 years. Watch that video. Oh, I'm not playing with you. How about this, everybody? Come to my Black History Festival. It's mine. I'm gonna take full responsibility that you're gonna have the time of your life under this. It's going to be in Kansas City, Kansas, Memorial Day weekend, the 27th, 28th, and 29th, 2022. Big. For more information, go to my website, businessintheblack.net. Watch my movie, everybody. This is it right here. It's called Business in the Black. It's a documentary I've done. I produced it and everything, so I know it's good. And other people tell me that too every now and then. It ain't just my opinion, but I took it to 40 cities, and I showed this movie. Matter of fact, the city that our guest is from, it went to Pittsburgh to the Black library there. I don't remember the library. It had a good crowd. I was really happy about that. Check out my movie. It's streaming on Amazon, and my book is available also on my website, businessintheblack.net. Over 200 facts on slaves who went to college, slaves who own businesses, slaves who got enough money to buy their freedom, what racists did to destroy Black business districts across America. And I ain't just talking Tulsa neither. Because like what they did in my town here in Detroit, they ran that freeway right smack down the middle of that district. Said, we wiping all this out. All this y'all got. Put a freeway right down. They did it in many cities across America. So, and I name about 30 of them, I think, in my book. And again, it's very reasonably priced too. And go on and get you a copy. I'll autograph it for you, my friends. I ain't playing. I want you to have this. I got a bunch of them in the basement. I'd rather you have them. And after I sell 10, I donate one to a school. Now, you hear me use this word strong a lot. Strong, my favorite word, everybody. You know that by now. And it stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to my guest today. He's a strong man. Watch out, you'll see. Come on and introduce yourself. Thank you for being on Strong Inspirations.
Okay, my name is Samuel Black. I am the director of the African American program at the Senator John Hines History Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, right on. Appreciate you coming on. A couple questions before we get into the story. Let's say, are you from Pittsburgh?
Not originally. I've been here about 20 years.
Where originally at? Can I ask where originally?
Oh yeah, I'm from Ohio.
Ohio.
Yeah, I moved here from Cleveland.
Where's the plantation that your people come from? Do you know that?
No, I don't know that. I know what state they come from, but I don't know a particular name of a plantation. My family's from North Carolina and Kentucky.
Okay. So how did your folks get to Ohio? Well, you think it was because of the escape or some freedoms? Or
no. My family migrated in the 20th century from Kentucky to Ohio.
Okay.
And in particular, my father in the 1930s or early 40s.
Okay.
He was still a child. Came to reunite with his father after his mother had passed, and his great aunt, who was raising him after his mother's death, had passed away. So he was reunited with his father in the early 40s.
Ohio is a pretty decent town that doesn't have all that racial strife where you grew up. Is that the case, or do you remember some of it?
Oh, no, this is America, man. That happens everywhere.
Yeah.
Utopia of peace and equality and racial harmony that existed anywhere in this country. I mean, you have different degrees of it.
Yeah.
And in Ohio being one of the border states,
right?
A lot of people just call Ohio Alabama North.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so there are different degrees of struggle that Black folk have had to endure.
Is there someone or a couple people, the racist folks that did the dastardly deeds? You know what I mean by that? Like we said, Birmingham or something. It was the Bull Connors, and I mean they can name a name. Who had some political clout. Is there somebody like that in Ohio?
I've never thought of that. I have to give that more thought. I think that it's not directly comparable. In what we've learned in a narrative that had developed out of Alabama and Mississippi and some other places. So you can't directly compare that to somewhere like Ohio, where it's a different type of oppression. And it's more governmental and de facto oppression that existed in Ohio. For instance, you wouldn't have the degree of segregation that existed in the southern states, existing at the same level and the same type in somewhere like Ohio.
Right.
I'm not saying that segregation didn't exist in Ohio, it did, but there was a different degree. Right. It wasn't custom or it wasn't law, the way it was in some of the southern states. And so in Ohio, I had the benefit after I think about the third grade, I had the benefit of going to integrated schools.
Okay.
And not bust, but the school in my neighborhood. So I grew up in a community of African Americans, whites, Jews, all in a community. And
okay.
That's as a child. When you become an adult, the realities of the world hit you. And then
as a child, do you recall any scenario of some racial stuff white kids picking on you?
No, not like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he had certain things that happened,
Yeah.
you know, when I was older, high school kid. But the thing I distinctly remember was my family moved from what was probably I don't know the percentage, but I'm just going by what I remember. Probably a 98 or 99% Black community,
Right.
little neighborhood,
Right.
um, to this integrated neighborhood where you had the whites, Blacks, Jews. And this was in 1970. And I distinctly remember riding on my bike. I was about 9 years old. And my little brother, who was about 6, riding 2 on a bike. Remember those kids' bikes had the banana seat, we called them.
Yeah, I remember those.
And we were pulled over by police. And, you know, and they took down our information, who we were and what our names were, and then told us it was against the law to ride 2 on a bike. Now, how do we know that?
You're right.
You know, but the whole point was that it was not against the law. It's a police harassment.
That's right.
So he told us to walk our bike home. And the police car slowly followed us for about 4 blocks to our house. And the whole thing was that they wanted to know who we were and where we lived.
That's right.
And later on, at the time when my parents were not home, just myself and my siblings, the police broke into our house, no warrant.
Really?
And grabbed my older brother, who was about 13, by the leg and pulled him down the stairs, because when he saw the police coming in, he was coming down the stairs, but he immediately turned to go back up. All the yelling and screaming at us and everything, who we were, what are we doing in this house, blah, blah, blah. And that's something that's ingrained in my memory.
I'm sure.
And so when my younger brother, who was on that banana seat with me, became a police officer, I asked him to look us up. I said, I wanted to know if they recorded. And we were there in the record, in the police record. Didn't break a law, but they gathering information on all the Black people. And we were caught in that. It made me so angry because I was actually 9 years old, 1970. Made me so angry that this is how, these are the conditions, the oppressive conditions, the apartheid that African Americans live under. And the interesting thing was that going to a new school, living in a new community, the first friend I met was a young white kid. And we played every day at my house, at his house, all that type of thing. And not knowing that you can have these friendships develop in this greater society of oppression. There was absolutely no reason for my brother and I to have our names listed in the police records. None at all. We didn't break any law. We did what the officer told us to do, basically trying to terrorize us. So that's what I remember growing up, and I never forget it.
Is that what led you to, or what led you to like Black history like you do?
Because I went from Head Start, and I was in that first year of Head Start, 1964, I believe. I went from Head Start to the 3rd grade at Frederick Douglass Elementary School. And this is when it was, you know, somewhat segregated.
Okay.
The entire school was Black. The principal was a Black woman. All the teachers were Black. All the people working in the lunchroom, including my mother, were Black. All my fellow students were Black. And, you know, at that point, Head Start, kindergarten, whatever, up to 3rd grade, you don't understand racial dynamics. you can care less about racial dynamics.
Yeah, oh, sure.
I enjoyed my classmates. I love my teachers. I had teachers from those early years, in early 60s, mid 60s, who came to my high school graduation. And I hadn't seen them. I didn't, my siblings had to tell me who they were. I didn't know who they were, but they came because they knew I was graduating from high school.
Mm.
And they're the ones who set me on this path. But the whole point I'm making is that at Frederick Douglass Elementary School, I was taught Black history in the kindergarten. I don't know if you remember, there used to be or still is, because I bought some for my son, these sort of comic strip, I remember the name of them, but they were sort of comic strip stories and biographies of historic Black people. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Harriet Tubman, and so forth. I mean, by the time I got out of kindergarten, I knew Black history. So it set me on the path of appreciating the story and appreciating the history. And although I didn't necessarily go to college for this initially, I went to school to study engineering and architecture.
Right.
But in my architecture courses, I was more interested. I didn't really care about Pantheon and Westminster Abbey and
Right.
Notre Dame Cathedral. Those are all great historic structures and gems of architectural technology.
Right.
I was interested in African architecture.
Oh.
So I was doing my projects based on African architecture. And the professor, had a negative opinion of African architecture. He basically said it doesn't exist. So I said, well, you don't know African, you can't tell me that because you don't know the history. By even saying that means you don't know it.
Yeah.
And
when you talk about architecture, you're talking about the buildings?
I'm talking about buildings. Yeah, I'm talking about buildings and so forth. African architectural types and technology and ingenuity. People don't know that George Washington's barn was designed. Africans develop round structures.
Okay.
George Washington's barn at Mount Vernon was round. And I said, he didn't design that. His enslaved designed and built that for him, forced to do it, forced to take their own cultural technology and give it to someone else, give it to their president.
Yeah.
And so those were the things I was interested in as an architectural student.
That might also be why the Oval Room is oval, because some Black guys helped build that.
It may be. I haven't looked at that, but it could possibly be. But so that led me even deeper into Black history because I just had a thirst for knowledge from what those teachers gave me as a kindergarten student and first grade student, and so forth.
Is there a ha-ha moment for you that you reflect upon that said something that you learned that just, for lack of a better way of putting it, just completely blew your mind and said, wow, this is it for me right here?
I guess I don't think there was like a crescendo or something like that that kind of led me that way. I was just so interested, majoring in architectural technology. And my elective classes were African American Studies courses.
Okay.
And I just got so deep into that I continued on as a double major. I picked up the African American Studies as a major also. And I was just, I guess you begin to learn the deeper story and appreciate the deeper story.
Right.
And I was really into that. I was really into learning. And I'm still like that. It doesn't matter whether it's African, Asian, or, I've recently been studying a lot on the Ottoman Empire. because I'm looking at the international dynamics that led to and further supported the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm.
And you can't just look at Europe, Africa, and the Americas in that dynamic. You have to look at the global situation, because it was a global situation.
Oh, sure, sure.
You know, the whole point of Columbus's voyage was to avoid the Ottoman Empire. And, you know, the whole Ottoman Empire that cut off European trade with the Far East through the Silk Road from China through India and Asia, all the way to Levant into the Mediterranean. And the Ottoman Empire basically controlled that territory.
They were based where?
Yeah, starting in 14th century in Turkey.
Oh, really?
And by 1453, he had brought an end to the Byzantine Empire and took over Constantinople and turned it into Istanbul. But the whole point is that, you know, Europeans had to find an alternate route to the Far East if they want to continue that trade that they found was lucrative for them. Remember, you had all these Dutch, Indian Company, Royal African Company, all these companies that global corporations that developed following that, following Columbus. And Columbus, you know, we know that America was something new for him. It wasn't new to Africans, they had been here. It wasn't new to the Vikings, they had been here. It wasn't new to Asians, they had been here, but it was new to Western Europeans. And so, you know, that's sort of the interest that I have is looking at global history and where does Africa fit into global history? And this is the argument that Carter G. Woodson had.
Right.
You know, his whole thing was not just American based, you know, and people, so you have to look globally. And if it is anyone in this country that should be looking globally, it should be those of us of African descent, because we are global. Yeah. Our ancestry is global, regardless of what conditions they were. And so when I look at Black history, I look at it from a global perspective, and not a national perspective.
Let me ask you this: Has there okay, going on the global tip, is there a African explorer who I don't know, found you know, some new territory and or just explored themselves? Is there somebody like that that people know? Maybe more than one or otherwise?
There are, you know, J.A. Rogers gave us those names of those people and those stories. Ivan Van Sertima gave us more history about that. Lerone Bennett, in his book, beautiful book, Before the Mayflower, gave us some of that history as well.
Okay.
There's a few other publications that have come out more recently. I was just looking up on my bookshelf to see if I had it here, but I don't. It's at home. That really takes a look at what we may call explorers. And we know that Mali under Mansa Musa sent ships across the Atlantic.
Now, hold on, say that Mali did what now?
Mali sent ships across the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. And it's
Mali, a Black African nation.
Empire.
Okay.
Yeah, the Mali Empire. We know that the Vikings sailed to Iceland, to Greenland, you know, 15 or 500 years before Columbus.
Are the Vikings Black?
No. Oh. But the whole point is that these are actions of human endeavor and not so much of racial endeavor. Because you had others that we don't look upon because they were not part of our common learning.
Right.
It was the Western European story that was a part of our common learning. It's
Right.
what you learn in school.
Right.
You learn about Columbus. You don't learn about Leif Erikson. You don't learn about Mansa Musa's people. You know, you don't learn it. But if you read Ivan Van Sertima, you will.
Yes.
So it's all a matter of where you get your information. And what perspective are you looking at? If you're looking at it from a global perspective,
yes,
you have to ask yourself the question, you know, if India has this illustrious ancient history and culture, why aren't we taught about that in school? But yet we can know everything we want to know about Charlemagne and Otto the Great and all these European people. So that's part of trying to become or recognize that the events in world history were inclusive. You know,
I got you.
You can't talk about world history and leave out China, but
That's
we
right.
do. And then you can't talk about world history and leave out the indigenous people of North America,
That's
but
right.
we do, you know. So I try not to follow that particular path when I'm studying African American history. I try to look at it from a global perspective, and I put it in that particular context.
Okay.
Because then you understand it. It's the whole thing with DNA.
Yeah.
And everybody's doing their genealogy and getting their
Right.
DNA tests, and they're finding out they have linkage to the region of Nigeria.
Right.
You know, I'm Nigerian. Right. No, you're not Nigerian, because Nigeria is a nation state. You're not a citizen of Nigeria.
Right.
You are a descendant of people who lived in that area.
Right.
You know, so these are the types of things that we need to start doing with our history. And our forefathers have already told us and given us the path. Du Bois gave us the path. Woodson gave us the path. You know, others have given us the path to follow.
Let me ask you this, and I know you got this one. Give us a story of, if there is one, of an African nation invading a white nation. Has that ever happened? Or, I mean, somehow, has Africans ever enslaved anybody but other than Africans?
You know, slavery had no color at one point. And Africans held Europeans and Asians, enslaved them at one point.
Really?
Especially during the time of Carthage and Rome, the early years of Islam. Islam was basically colorless, still is, in their dynamics. There might be some local things that happen, but Islam itself, the Quran, it's not based on that. And it was not used to oppress other people because of the color of their skin.
Okay.
Or abused.
Okay.
You can put it there, instead of saying it wasn't used, say it wasn't abused that way.
Yes.
So those dynamics did happen. But what you're looking at, what you're speaking of, is sort of a political, cultural ideology that Europeans felt they had to conquer other worlds. So when Columbus came, what did he do? He took native people back to Spain, which really sparked not only the interest in the riches that existed in the West, but also the possibility of conquer, you know, because they didn't look like them.
Yeah.
They see, Columbus was a warrior in a sense, you know, I mean, he's a merchant, but he was a merchant hired by warriors, right? A warring nation in Spain.
Okay.
Because they had just defeated the Muslims in Spain, right? So they were a warrior nation. He came under direction and working for a warrior nation and came upon people of peace.
which is part of why people don't celebrate him and are taking his statues, because when he got there, he killed a lot of the native people to take over the land, so on and so forth.
Well, not only he, but the Spanish government, when he revealed to them what was there. I mean, he made 3 voyages across the Atlantic.
Oh.
And then others followed him. And then, the whole thing just exploded in terms of I hate to use the term explorers.
Yeah.
Because they weren't exploring, they were trying to find areas to conquer and to ascertain the riches, the agricultural riches, the mineral riches, the natural riches, and the human riches. And shortly after that came the approval of the Vatican Church that began the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
And so, it's very hard for me to make direct parallels.
I got you.
With the actions of Europeans. And I'm not saying that there wasn't internal strife in Africa. There's wars that have been going on for a very long time.
Yeah.
You can go all the way back to Nile Valley civilizations and ancient Kemet and so forth. And you would find instances of conquer of other peoples, So
Okay.
Those things did happen, but there's a different context with what we understand from 15th century onward in terms of what Europeans were doing and then what Africans were doing. You can't build an empire without some type of war taking place.
Yeah.
So when you talk about Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, the major 3 West African empires, somebody had to perish in that expansion and in that empire building. So yeah, those types of things, war happens and war always happens. But to the degree that you cross an ocean to conduct that war, that's a different type of context.
Yeah, sure. Well, we went, I didn't know we was getting this deep. I'm ready, man. Thank you. So you, okay, how about this? In your research, is there one of, and I know it's a ton of them, one of the moments or the people that make you the proudest?
I guess I could look at the era of abolition in the United States. So looking at primarily 1830s through up to the beginning of the Civil War. And then the end of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment.
Okay.
Because I differ with Tom Brokaw, as he calls World War II the greatest generation. I argue that the greatest generation was 1865, because that was the first time that the majority of people in North America were, on paper at least, free.
Right.
It was in 1865, by the end of 1865.
Right.
And I call that the greatest generation because at no other time in American history did you have nearly 4 million people almost overnight become free.
Right. Right.
That's extremely significant.
Right. I got you.
And then to struggle through all types of obstacles and challenges and barriers and oppression and so forth to maintain that we have all these people today. It could have, our ancestors could have been easily wiped out, but there was something about them that would not allow them to perish.
You mentioned the 1830s in some regard. What's that connection?
Yeah, I'm looking at the formation of the anti-slavery societies that put into motion. I mean, you're talking about nearly 3 decades of struggle of work. When we look at the modern civil rights movement, we typically look at 1954 through 1968. Whether we agree with that or not,
Yeah, I got you. I got you.
most things pretty much stop with Dr. King's assassination.
Yes.
And it just formulated in a different way, in a different context.
Yes.
But the movement was really from 54, Brown v. Board.
Yes.
Dr. King's assassination. And compare that to the movement to free people from 1833 or so to 1865.
Okay, before we get to that, I'm gonna go a little step early then. What was the condition of slavery, the attitude, political structures from 1619, let's say, up to 1830? Was there a lot of laissez-faire type attitude towards this? Or were there, again, a lot of uprisings, or the uprisings came later as we understood that this was going on too long? What was that dynamic from, let's say, again, the 1619 up to maybe that 1830 period you're talking about?
1619, well, there were very few Africans here in 1619.
Okay.
Those who came or who were brought here, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. From what I understand, the first Africans were free. They didn't come here in chains. And so that's really where to start. Judge Leon Higginbotham puts up the best argument or shows the best evidence in his book called In a Matter of Color, in which he gives us the colonial statutes that not only establish freedom and unfreedom, but also establish the caste system.
Okay.
Because around 1619, let's say before 1640, when the first colonial legislation passed statutes and laws defining who was a slave and who was not a slave. So this roughly 30-year period, where you had people who of different colors, people who were native or indigenous people in North America, some of them were enslaved.
Right.
People who were brought to this land in chains from Africa were enslaved.
Right.
And some people brought to this land from Europe were enslaved.
Right.
And so that's the reason you have these statutes, because as Judge Higginbotham puts it, it wasn't so clear in terms of determining slavery. America at that time, colonies at that time, weren't necessarily being defined by race or by servitude.
Okay.
But as you begin to have more Europeans settle, and you begin to struggle with the fact that you are a minority in this land, with all of the indigenous people, and then with the increasing number of Africans, the Europeans were the minority in this land. And so you had to have, because they had the power, they were colonies of Great Britain, so they were extensions of Great Britain.
Right.
And Great Britain at that time was probably the most powerful nation on the planet.
Oh.
And so these things had to be determined, as well as with the French.
Yeah.
French colonies, these things had to be determined.
Yeah.
And so by 1640, when you begin to have these first statutes and laws passed defining who was free and who was not free.
Okay.
And how that will be perpetuated in the future. First thing they did was define the fact that if a Black woman was not free, all of her progeny will live with the same condition that she has.
Yeah, I heard, yeah.
So that set in motion the rest of slavery in the United States all the way up to 1865, that if a Black woman was a slave, any child she had, regardless of who the father was, that child will be born under the same condition as his mother.
What's the status of slavery as we move into the 1700s? When and I guess I'm getting at, when is there chatter to first to start saying there are a lot of abolitionists, not just a few. I mean, there are more societies, organizations are going through. When does that happen? Is that 1700s? And then how does the 1700s play out? And then when do slaves start really finding ways to escape? You know, what's that timeline up to, you know, the 1830s, let's say?
Well, it depends on what colony you're in.
Okay.
I'll use Pennsylvania since that's where I live.
Yeah.
In the late 1600s, 1688 or so, you began to have declarations of pro-slavery or anti-slavery, and not so much in terms of the clash that we will see in the 19th century. But these are led by ethnicity and religion.
Okay.
And so in Pennsylvania, you have German colonists who do not, by and large, do not accept slavery as a part of their lifestyle or their enterprise.
Okay.
Followed by Quakers. Most people give Quakers all the credit.
Yes.
William Penn, and you know, he was a Quaker, and William Penn wasn't born a Quaker. You know, William Penn adopted that as an older gentleman and as a colonist. He was a slaveholder, which many Quakers were. Many Quakers participated economically in the slave trade in terms of owning ships, to owning auction blocks, and so on and so forth. And so those are facts. But around the early 1700s or so, there began to be changes within the Society of Friends, or the Quakers, that began to increase in the anti-slavery movement, because now they're starting to see the inhumanity, and these things are to them contradictions to the way that they saw God.
Okay, I got you.
And so they began to have almost like edicts out of the Society of Friends, being anti-slavery, and if you participated in owning slaves, then you could be excommunicated. Then it went to, if because some people say, okay, they got rid of their slaves, they freed their slaves. Okay, some of their slaves became Quakers. And then the society came down with another edict.
Okay.
Because a lot of people freed their slaves, but they still had investment in the slave trade, the slaveocracy.
Okay.
And so it then became that you had to divest your participation in any way, shape, or form in the slave trade. So you had to divest in any financial holdings you may have had in slave ships, in the insurance companies that held policies on slave ships, in the slave auction blocks, all of the economic aspect of the slaveocracy.
Okay.
The Quakers. So by the time of the French and Indian War, and really up to American Revolution, Quakers were pretty much divested in slavery and no longer participants in the slave trade.
The national media, whatever there was of that, and this has always been a tactic that we as enslaved and against civil rights have always employed to get to the better consciousness of America. That was also some technique or something that hopefully the newspapers was hearing these stories, so that Northerners and others who were against it would then even heighten their fight against slavery?
It played out in Congress after the Revolution. See, the colonists fought a war in which they lost. First of all, not all colonists were revolutionaries. There were many who were loyal to the king, so they were loyalists. And fighting that war meant that these colonies who were trying to form a new nation, see, each colony was independent.
Yeah.
That's why each one had their own government, in a sense. So each colony was pretty much independent. But this new idea of taking these colonies and collaborating as a union, not only to win this war, but to move forward as a nation, and each state having its own rights. We're still dealing with states' rights today, right?
Right.
So it's not so clear cut as left and right or up or down or something like that. It is rather complicated. But what you begin to see around the time of the Revolution is not only fighting this war against Great Britain for to form this new country, but also fighting this internal war between those who have enormous economic profits off of slaveocracy, and then those who don't have those enormous profits, but have industry and other things, manufacturing and so forth. So there's sort of a loose kind of bond between North and South, and it basically is developed that way. A lot of people ask the question, why did the South hold on to slavery so long when the North got rid of slavery and everything like that? You have to look at what the South is. It's conducive for an agrarian economy.
Right.
And to be successful with an agrarian economy.
Right.
You can't do, cotton plantations in Western Pennsylvania.
Right.
So those contexts are different. Right. You had slavery that existed in Pittsburgh, but the dynamics of what that was different. So you're not going to have 500 slaves on a sugar plantation in Western Pennsylvania. That, just the natural environment won't allow that.
Right, I got you.
Can't grow sugar up north.
Yeah, I got you.
This is how this agrarian economy developed in these southern states, because it was conducive to making enormous profits off of cash crops.
Right.
Cotton, sugar, tobacco, indigo, so on and so forth.
Right.
These things were important to those economies. Whereas the northern states found a different economy under different laws. Pennsylvania was the first to set in motion a gradual abolition of slavery that was in March of 1780. The revolution is still going on. When Pennsylvania said that hopefully in a generation or two, slavery would no longer exist, because we're no longer going to allow people to perpetuate that type of lifestyle and that type of economy in Pennsylvania. But there were always those who got around that, like George Washington. The story is that when George Washington was president and Philadelphia was the capital, then the slaves that he had living with him in Philadelphia fell under Pennsylvania law, which meant that any slaves born to your enslaved women had to be registered. And when they're registered, then they come under the Gradual Abolition Act, which meant that after 28 years of life, they are free.
Right.
That is if their mother is a slave, right?
Right.
Going back to the 1640 statutes. So what Washington would do is take his pregnant slaves back to Mount Vernon in Virginia, where they would give birth there and not come under Pennsylvania law, where those slaves become free when they're adults.
Really?
You see, so there's all types of loopholes, and we see that all the time with American law. It doesn't matter whether the law is there, people are going to find a way around it, even the president.
Let me ask you this. When is the explosion of the escapes of slavery? What's the high point of those years? Is there such?
Yeah, sort of, because we don't have real hard statistics. It's like once the underground started in the 1830s at some point,
okay,
we don't know how many people escaped through the underground network. No one was really keeping those statistics. The closest we came is William Steele's work in Philadelphia, where he's recording the stories of people who come across his office at the Anti-Slavery Society. But not all people escaped went to the Anti-Slavery Society office.
Right.
Okay, people were really afraid and really tried to hide in society. So if you can imagine in, let's say, 1780 to 1850, Philadelphia was probably the largest Black population in the US.
Okay.
Maybe Boston and New York followed, but it was definitely Philly.
Okay.
And so you would find Hercules, for instance, one of George Washington's enslaved men who was like the master chef or whatever. When he escaped, he went to Philadelphia and disappeared in the Black metropolis that existed there, so all these types of dynamics were taking place, but I would tend to say that period between the 1830s and the leading up to the Civil War was really primary. The reason why is that a second Fugitive Slave Act had to be passed by Congress in 1850 because of the enormity of people finding their freedom in different types of ways. Through the court systems, just through, as John Hope Franklin say, the best way to resist slavery was to liberate yourself. So this whole thing with the Fugitive Slave Act was to try to legally stop the escapes and legally penalize the anti-slavery societies that existed all over the North.
Right.
And this was a problem because it was becoming a problem for Southern slaveholders. Now you have to look at the things that have been taking place from 1780 to the Civil War. You have the Haitian Revolution. It had a great impact on Black America, free or enslaved.
Because they heard the stories of how they had freed themselves.
And then you had Gabriel Prosser in Richmond, Virginia, slavery. Yes. You had Denmark Vesey.
Yes.
1822 in Charleston. Richmond and Charleston, two major Southern towns that had enormous enslaved populations. Okay. As a matter of fact, South Carolina probably had more enslaved people and more free Blacks than white folk. That became an increasing problem, and that's why you begin to see some really drastic laws being passed
for the vote
in these Southern states.
Yeah,
to protect their slaveocracy. And while in the North, they come up with this American Colonization Society, right, in 1820 or so, to develop the colony of Liberia, which many African Americans began to see that as a way of extending slavery, because what you're doing is opening the door to free Blacks by saying, here's a country across the Atlantic. You can go back to Africa where your ancestors were or where you were, regardless of the fact that many of them didn't even come from that Liberia.
Right.
But this is one way of sort of decreasing the activism in the abolition communities and societies all over the North by allowing free Blacks passage to Liberia. Well, some of them, including Richard Allen, including Martin Delany, saw that more as a scheme to extend slavery than it was a humanitarian thing by providing freedom to people of African American descent. So that period, I would say, is the greatest period, and it's proof that it was doing something damaging to slaveocracy because of the Fugitive Slave Act, which was a drastic law paying incentives to people from capture to imprisonment to the legal system, the judicial system, and so forth. There were incentives all along the way. You know, and when you look at the immigration laws, especially Arizona's law, Alabama's law, they're very similar to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. That's why we got to know our history. We started off very early about, you know, this. That's why we got to know our history. You know, it doesn't matter whether it happens in February or any time of the year.
Oh, sure.
Anytime there's a law like that that's passed, that's really aimed at and directed at people of color. It's not directed at Russians coming to the United States. It's directed at Latinos. So we need to get that straight and understand Latinos and Haitians.
I love it.
So we need to know and understand those types of dynamics. But I do look at that period as probably the greatest period because that's the activism of Harriet Tubman in there. That's the activism of Frederick Douglass, Charles Lennox Ramon, Martin Delany, and a host of others, hundreds and hundreds of African Americans putting their life on the line for their fellow man and woman.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's so important to understand that time period.
As we, you know, because of timing and what have you, well, we can keep going. And everybody, I want to have him back on the channel.
Well, have me back.
Everybody,
have me back.
Anytime you want to come on.
Have me back because I'm gonna have to go in a few minutes.
Yeah. How about this? Where do you work and what is the museum and the website? Is there something that you want to share?
Yes,
we didn't get to that one yet.
Yeah, I'm at the John Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. We're the largest history museum in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, over 400,000 square feet facility, 6 floors of exhibits. Within our family of exhibits include the Fort Pitt Museum, which is located downtown at the point of the Three Rivers. Meadowcroft Historic Village and Rock Shelter, located about 35 miles south of Pittsburgh in Washington County. It is the location of the oldest place of human habitat in North America. It goes back 19,000 years. So you can see the archaeological dig and all that type of stuff there and the evidence of that. And we also operate the Western Pennsylvania Sports Museum, which, as you know, Pittsburgh is a big sports city. And we also operate the Thomas and Catherine Detre Library and Archives, where people can do further research on Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania history.
Okay.
And we're the oldest cultural institution in the city of Pittsburgh. We go back to 1879, when the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania was formed.
Okay. Have you written a book?
I have 3 books. My first published book, I served as an editor. It's an anthology called Soul Soldiers.
Okay.
African Americans in the Vietnam era.
Okay.
And
yeah, you got a picture. Let's show it, man. Let's plug this thing.
Yeah. Might be backwards, but that's it.
Yeah,
Writing backwards. Soul Soldiers. And it's all about the African American experience in Vietnam. It's not so much about the blow-by-blow battles,
the
Tet Offensive way and all that. That comes within telling the story about race and consciousness in Vietnam.
Yes.
And then my second book is a co-authored book And this actually, I started when I was still working in Cleveland, and then continue. And again, that's backwards, so I apologize.
No, we can see it right.
Is Alan E. Cole, a photographic history of African Americans in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
Alan Cole was a photographer, and he wasn't the first professional photographer in Cleveland, but he was probably the better known.
Okay.
And as I explain to people, you have to understand history and how the information of history comes to us. Cole is lauded. He was a great photographer, mid 20th century. He practiced from about let's say around 1919 till his death, or a few years before his death, around the mid 60s. But he chronicles this very important period, mid 20th century period in Cleveland, Ohio,
okay,
where the town becomes majority Black, still in his lifetime. And they're able to elect Carl Stokes as mayor and Louis Stokes as congressman and all those types of things. But anyway, I co-authored with Dr. Regina Williams, a Cleveland historian. And when I worked there at the Western Reserve Historical Society, where Cole's photograph collection is located, I was the curator of that collection.
Okay.
So I know him and his work like the back of my hand. And then my third publication is also an edited volume called The Civil War in Pennsylvania, the African-American Experience. And you can see Martin Delaney there, Marianne Shad Carey here, and some local guys there. So it really, again, I'm not a what I call a warmonger. There's plenty of books written about the battles of the Civil War, Vietnam War, and all that thing. I want to talk about the impact of war on people and families and communities.
Okay.
So I start off this book in 1843 with Henry Highland Garnett's speech at a Black men's convention in Buffalo, New York.
Okay.
Where he makes that famous speech telling the enslaved to resist, resist, resist. Let your motto be resistance. He makes that famous speech. That's where I start.
Okay.
15 years before the Civil War, African Americans had war on their mind. You know, so that's the context that I write this book. Okay. And I invited some other scholars to contribute chapters.
I love
in this book. And that's a really good chapter on Haiti in here, and Haiti's recruitment of African Americans to come there and help them build the country.
Oh, do you have a website or something how people can follow you?
Yeah, they can find me at the History Center's website. It's www.Heinz, like Heinz ketchup, HeinzHistoryCenter.org.
Okay. Well, hey, I thank you so much for coming on. And I mean that, man. Anytime we're going to talk offline or something, come on back on here, please.
Okay. All right.
I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Everybody, I'm telling you, boy, my man went deep, and I went deep with him as best I can, and he deeped me on deep. He deeper than me, for sure. Yeah, oh man, this was beautiful. Hit the subscribe button, everybody. I don't know what you're waiting on. You're sitting there watching me all the time. It's free. Don't ask no information. Like this video, because I know he didn't put it on you. Oh man, I learned a lot. Everybody I do, and I did this one for sure. Hit the notifications bell. When the videos come up, you get a ding. Watch my movie, read my book. Come to my festival, everybody. We're going to have a good time. We're going to do some dancing. I provide all the food and the beverages, but no liquor. I can't give you the liquor. I can tell you where you can get your own moonshine, though. And we're going to rock and roll. So come to that. Go to the website, businessintheblack.net. Go to his website. Go to his museum. And then when you do, before you go, call to see if he's there. And if he got a few minutes so you can shake his hand. You know, he might not give you the tour. He's bigger than that probably. But nonetheless, let him know you saw him on Strong Inspirations, because this guy right here, he a genius, man. That's how I look at it. And so to you, my brother, I say this with all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love that you as smart as you are, that you took the mantle, given where you come from and the beauty in your family and stuff like that, and said, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to read some more on my own. I'm going to pick up and I'm going to come up with these topics. And then you smart enough to remember the names and the dates. That's real good. Thanks for coming on the channel. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.